Hey, Composer Gloves here, and this is the 22nd video in the Kontakt from the Ground Up tutorial series. And today we're going to be talking about the mapping editor. So this is where you put your samples when we've already made an instrument. We made that flute. And so let's really quick open up a new Kontakt and let's drop some samples on there. Okay, so we've got a sample. And if we come in here to I'm going to move this up so that you just hear that. If we come in here to our mapping editor, we see that it creates a zone. We've already talked about zones. We know what zones are and do. If you don't know what a zone is, go look it up. And we see that it has this pitch information. Now, this could be important. So this is your root note, what Kontakt thinks your note is. And this is an actual note may be very different. Ideally, you want these notes to be the same. You want like an F to have the root note of F in the correct octave. Otherwise, it's going to transpose it according to what it thinks it should be. So if your root note's a C, but it's actually an F, the F, you're gonna be a fourth off on all your notes, and you might not notice it until you start working with it, and all of a sudden either whatever it is, cello sounds way off from everything else. And so that's important. So it creates a zone, and there's a few ways to manipulate this zone. Side to side is your keys, and so if we adjust that, you'll see our blue keys down here change. And you'll see it moves with our root note as we move the entire zone. You just click and drag. And you can also drag up and down. This adjusts the velocity. So if we hit it so it was louder, there's no sample there. So we could put a different sample there to sound thin. And if we hit it softer, it triggers our sample. So that is what that's about. And we could drag various samples onto here to create our instrument, just like we did our flute. Now, it ties in a lot with our group editor. So right now we've got one group. We'll name it the cello group. But if we add another sample, we may sometimes, actually quite a bit, we may actually desire to have them cover the exact same range and stuff. And then you have overlapping samples, and it gets a little complicated. So how do you see your different samples? Well, you're going to need to separate them into groups to make this easier. If you're working in the same group, I recommend going to the list view, and you can actually see your samples differently. We'll talk about the list view a little bit and later. So now let's talk about really quick. You have a zone, you dropped it on there, and you've got these controls that are basic controls over the zone. So you have your range, and you can drag up and down to change that as opposed to doing this. You have, so there's that. You have velocity, how loud and soft, its range on the keyboard. You have the root note, which will change this guy down here. So that is pretty cool. And then you also have your volume, how loud or soft that sample is. Hold down Control, click. Oh, it's not working here. Double click, hit 0 to return it to 0. You have your panning. So if we turn it all the way down, comes out the left, all the way up, comes out the right. And you can double click to type in a value. And then you have tuning. So let's say your root note is where it's at, but it's still slightly off. You could still change the tuning via this guy. And you can -0.2, or you could go -0.3 or up 0.4 or whatever. However far you need to go to get that thing in tune. And so now let's talk about some more advanced concepts. So let's say, well, first let's go over the edit menus. So in order to select a zone, you just select, or you can click and drag to select zones. I'm going to close the waveform editor to prevent confusion. You can click and drag, or you can click it, you can hold down Shift and click another one to add it to your selection. And you can likewise click again to remove it from your selection. You have these edits. So if we have a zone selected, we can cut that zone. And then we could go somewhere else, or we could just stay right here and we could go paste the zone and it comes back. You can copy the zone, you can duplicate it, and you can delete it if you so desire. You also have this exchange sample option. What does this do? You click on it and oops, you put down the wrong sample, but you have the zone setting is right and it's in the correct spot. So you could go through wherever that sample was and you can replace it with the correct sample, which is really nice. Coming down here, we have select all zones. We'll select all our zones. So if you have a lot of zones, that could matter. You have deselect all zones. And now these things are group specific, and we'll talk about that depending on how you have your current zones set up. You have move zones to a new empty group. So if we wanted to, we could do that, and they're now in our new group. And how do we see which ones are just in which group? It's pretty simple. You go to selected groups only will only show what zones you have in your currently selected group. So if you turn that on and we go over here, you'll notice that this sample is in the new group. So we could put this like the Fiend 8. And you'll notice that if we click on our other group here, this sample is the only one in that group. And so that's important to know. And that's how you deal with if you have like a bunch of samples. We just added these to the cello group, but if we switch, bang, only this one shows up. But if you turn it off, you see them all at the same time. So this can affect the way you're editing things. So we're going to delete this group, right click, delete selected groups. Make sure that this is not selected, delete selected groups. Okay, so we have our cello group. So that's one way to do it. You can, you can also deselect all zones. So occasionally you may blow up your sample across the screen, and for whatever reason, it won't let you grab the edges to bring it in and rein it in or whatever. Something's weird. You can come up here and you can go deselect all zones. I've had to do that a few times. I can't figure out in the cases that I've had to why, but that's just a nice way to just move on with your life. We have move zones. We've already done that. You can clone the group. I do not know if this keeps the samples in the original zone, but I would expect it to. I don't know about that, but if you're doing something like that and that's important to you, check it out. I think this is much more likely. You can select your samples and move them to, if you have, this will show you all your groups, and you can move them to a group that you designate. You have move each sample to its own empty group, or you can clone an existing group, keep the processing, and I'm not sure if it keeps, once again, the samples itself, but it'll put them all in their own groups. Very useful for a drum kit. I would assume you'd probably want to use the empty one, but I'm not you. So we have batch tools. What batch tools are is sometimes you have samples that are overlap. You want to do something specific, like real specific. Let's say this is some sort of a hi-hat, and this is some sort of a hi-hat. And you want these things to overlap right here because from this point on, they contain some data that this key needs for some reason. And you can go into batch tools, and you can apply X fade so that it fades between the two slowly. So the volume will turn off, and this one will fade out as you go higher up, creating a very smooth transition if they're overlapping. And that's really nice because if you have like let's say you've got a cello and you've gone above and beyond and you have like 8 different velocity levels for that cello on one particular note. And so you map them all out, and they're all, and you overlap them a little bit, but it sounds kind of choppy, like the timbre of it changes as you go up, and you don't want that. Well, you should go to batch tools if you have all your things selected, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to so you see the X fade, to fade between them. And I'm not really going to cover these in this series unless I get like specifically requested to do it, because I've never had to use it, but that's the concept behind here. So if you need it, this is where it's at. You also have this create AET more flare. Whoops. We're going to hit cancel. I'm going to cover that in a separate video because that's like a whole load of other stuff. It has to do with processing down here in the group effects specifically. And it allows you to do some really cool things, sort of another approach to the things changing too drastically because your samples are separate. But it's like a really cool approach that results in a lot of cool sound design options. Then down here you have your auto move root key. So it'll automatically try to detect whatever the root key is. And actually, you know what? I think it might be similar to this button. So if we have a root key and we change it to be like way over here, if you hit auto right here, it'll move this to the nearest spot. It'll move your sample to wherever your root key is so that it doesn't need to transpose it as far. And if you don't know what transposition is, then you probably don't know music theory. So go watch the music theory series I have. And transpositions, when you're taking one, anyways, never mind. I'm not going to define transposition. Go look up some more music theory. That's like basic knowledge. So if it's that far, you hit auto, you'll see that our root, you hit root, not auto. Auto does something else. All right, so let's say it's up there again. And it's like way up there. Whoa, not that far. And you want it over there. Well, it's easy peasy. You hit root and it will move it to the root with the least amount of transposition necessary. You'll notice that as we move our zone around, it also changes the root note relative to wherever the zone is. So if our root note was like down there and we move it, you'll see that it moves when we grab that. So anyways, that's what that is. So auto move root. I'm not 100% sure on what some of these things do. Map mode, chromatic. So the mapping mode, and you also have show sample names, and you can see if they disappear, boom, they're there. Auto move root key. Ouch! When you move your sample, it moves the root key. But I bet if we turn this off, yep, it leaves the root key exactly where it's at. So that's exactly what that button does. And now you know what the root button does and that button does. So perfect. And now I know. Okay, so we have this map mode chromatic. This will basically say you can move it like this. Say this zone, you want it specifically to map to just the white keys. You can do that. White keys only, black keys only, snap to white keys, snap to black keys, so that down here it'll snap. So if you have snap to white keys, you can't, oh, you can't select black keys. All right, I don't know what that button does. But just so you know, there are options there for you. So I just keep mine on chromatic, mostly because I'm not 100% on what that does. And these auto mapping functions. So there's all these different ways to name your samples so that they automatically map. But I do not encourage auto mapping, because if you come at it with the correct perspective, then I'm fine with it, like whatever. But when you're starting out, you kind of have this perspective that it's like I'm a writer and I'm going to make a book, right? And I have all these ideas, but I expect the word processor to take the ideas I have them in some sort of a list, and then write my book for me. Like, boom, organize it for me, make it happen. And that's just not the way it works. You need to go in and you need to type in all the words and stuff. And it's the same with this. You have your samples and you have your vision and you have your ideas. And this is a neat way. Auto mapping is a neat way to drop things in quickly, but I even think there's faster ways in some cases where you just name your samples cleverly. So let's say you're doing a chromatic instrument and you name it 1, C1, and then that's it. Like it's a flute maybe. Well, a flute wouldn't have a C1 note, a piano. And then you've got actually they wouldn't have yeah, they would. Then you put 1 so that all your 1s pop up in your octave. Then you have your 2 for all the next notes. So you can simply drag and drop and bang, it's done. Way faster than auto mapping. So you have this, but you can, if you want, you can click auto map setup and it will take apart your name wherever there's spaces in their sample file name. And you can select what that thing represents if it's here. And you can click apply and it will auto map it for you. Now, another thing is this happens instantly without you really knowing. So if there's some like pattern problem, or maybe you didn't name it just right and it goes weird, it just creates a lot of troubleshooting. So that's another reason why I just avoid it. I kind of feel that it's just the easy way out, and in the end, it actually is more trouble than it's worth. So that's what that's all about. So we've talked about reasons why you want to have things overlapping. Let's say you have a morph function going on. We haven't talked about that. That's what these guys are for. Now these guys are going to cover later, but it's a very good reason to have things overlapping. Or you've got a whole bunch of different velocity layers or different sample types, and it's just become extraordinarily tedious. Percussive libraries mapping can look really weird sometimes. It just gets tedious to look at it like this, and you need to see your samples individually. And you go to list view, and you'll actually see them. And they're in their groups, and you can expand and collapse the groups, and you can move them around like so. It's just another way to look at your mapping editor in a way that doesn't like murder you. So that is one option. So that's what list view is for. That's all it really does. Just a different way of looking at your samples. Okay, so we've covered all this stuff. We've covered the edit menu. We've got all that jazz down. There's only a few things really left. And we've covered overlapping and how to do the fades between them and stuff. So if we have our samples selected, we have a problem because these ones are overlapping. Let's say we don't want them overlapping. We've dropped them in weird. Well, that's what these menus are for. This will remove overlapping from sideways. So we click that and our samples are selected. So only these samples will be affected. And we click it and bang, it will figure out what it thinks the best solution is if you don't want to do it manually, which could be nice because it could make selecting things easier. If things are not lining up and down, you can go ahead and select your samples or your zones. I should be calling these zones. And you hit the up and down key and bang, it'll figure out the best up and down. Now these guys over here, they'll expand your zones to their limits according to wherever the nearest zone is. So this guy will only extend to this, and then we'll go all the way out, versus these two guys will cover up this area and fly all the way out. Actually, this guy may move over. See, you're letting Kontakt decide right now, but it's a quick way to fill up space. So let's say we don't want these gaps here. We can hit the over one, and they fill up. And now let's say that's not necessarily what we want either. So we want, we've got space problems. Like, oh, we've got this space here. Well, you can click the up and down option, and bang, it fills that space up. Then you can click the other one, and bang, like you have your entire keyboard range fulfilled just like that. And so as you can see, if you have one sample mapped all the way across, it may not let you select it. It's weird. Anyways, so that's what that is. We've already talked about what root does. Here's our root note, and if our root notes move to some crazy position, like down there, and it has to transpose this far every time you want to trigger that sample, which could be hard on your CPU, you can hit root, and it will just move the sample down there. But you may or may not want that. But then it also gives you just a quick tip. If you're mapping and your root note's over there and you don't want to have to move your root note up and down via this, I believe you could set this with the Midi controller somehow too, but I don't remember. You could just hit that, and all of a sudden your root note's linked much closer to your original sample, and you can just drag it back to wherever it was, and you can move on. We've already talked about auto. It will, oh no, we haven't talked about auto. Auto will analyze your file and kind of decide what the best move is for it. So if you hit auto, it'll move your it'll move your root note to wherever it thinks it should be. And right now it's all C3. Honestly, it's another case of the sort of the easy way out. If I don't know what a sample is, I'll open it up in a pitch recognition program like Newtone or something to figure it out. Also, you have these guys right here. These are MIDI controllers that essentially do the same things these do, except for if we click it, now we have our MIDI. So if we hit two notes, it'll the low end of our sample. So if this is the zone we want to fix, if we hit a note down here, and if we hit a note over here, it sets that range for us. So it'll take the low note and the high note and put it in that range. Same for up and down velocity. You could hit a note down here and a note up there, and it will set the velocity range accordingly to our MIDI controller. Actually, I believe velocity is where you hit it on the note. So if we hit it really high, really low, yeah, I believe that's how it works. Okay, so let's say you finally got your thing set up just the way you want it to be. Like everything's in the right place, and you don't want to accidentally be dragging your samples around. Oops, sorry about that. You don't want to accidentally be dragging your samples around. You can hit this lock button, and it locks the editor, so you cannot move things around, but you can still select them, because sometimes you want to move around in your wave editor, and you'll do a lot of clicking up here to quickly select samples, and this can be troublesome if you are if you accidentally move something. So that's really good for this sort of a thing. But you can still edit the zone options. So these are still available to you. You can still move them around and change them. It just locks their place on the grid. You have the solo zone. So if we hit solo zone, it will only allow the zone you have selected to be heard. So that just that one sample. So here's this sample over here. But if we hit somewhere else on the keyboard, as you can see, a sample should be sounding, but there is no sample because we have solo zone on. Now I've talked about the groups only option already. If we make a new group, I prefer to add samples like this because then they automatically pop up in this group. Okay, so new group, and we switch between our groups. It'll automatically show us only those samples. Turn it off. No longer the problem. Also, if you select a sample, it'll show you the sample name there, and you can actually go back and forth between the samples already down. Pretty easy. It switches out the samples with the samples in your folder. So you notice we're going 13, 14, 15, that type of a deal. So it's not the other samples in your program. It's the samples in the folder. Also, you have a when you select a sample, no, that's all I wanted to say about that. All right, so we have our solo zone, group select only. Turn that off. You can see all your groups at the same time, which could be really nice. And then you have this auto select group. So if with this off, if we select a note, let's turn our selected groups off. So we have these notes that are not in this group, right? Turn our lock grid off. And as we move around, we're staying in the same group, but this one's not in this group. It's in the SDGF group. So if we wanted to select the group appropriately as well, so that we could do maybe quicker editing on whatever we're doing, we want to be able to just bang, 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 bang. Make sure your group edit all options is off though. You could just select the groups only, and then, whoops, not that one. Auto select group, and now when you click it, boom, it selects the one you want. So different group, and it will select them so you can edit them individually, or you can hit shift. Oh no, shift doesn't do it. So if you want to edit multiple groups like that, you'd have to select them themselves, or you can hit the edit all group if you have a bunch of groups and you can edit them all at the same time. Or if you just have 12 out of 30 you want to edit, you'd have to select them like that, I believe. And that is the mapping editor. That's a lot. I tried to cover it all in one video. I hope you got what you were looking for out of this video. I was going to make an instrument at the end of this video, but it's already a pretty long video, so I'm just going to call it good right here. If you have any questions about what things do, oh, I don't think I covered this button. Select zone via MIDI. You have a MIDI controller. You can hit it, and it will select the zone you are, as you can see. It selects the zone. So that's a quick way of moving around the menu. The keyboard editor. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out my music on composegloves.com. I have free stuff on my website, free patches. I'm going to add some more Kontakt instruments to demonstrate some cool ideas. And just have a blessed day.